The Department of Literatures and English, in collaboration with the UWI Bookshop, welcomes you all, specially invited guests in the physical space, and all of you who are currently viewing the department's YouTube channel to the book launch of Hurricane Watch by Olive Sr. We are thrilled to have been given the opportunity to host this launch and offer our hearty congratulations to Miss Olive Sr. on the publication of this remarkable poetry collection. I will now ask our Deputy Dean for the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Dr. Nicole Plummer, to bring greetings on behalf of the faculty, after which Ms. Lisa Brown, lecturer in the DLIE, will introduce the celebrated author of today's book launch.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Dr. Spencer. Good afternoon, Ms. Senior, our current poet laureate, specially invited guests, wonderful, attentive audience, both face-to-face and online. Thank you all for being here. I'm honored to bring greetings and issue a special welcome on behalf of our current dean, Professor Sylvia Coenberg. I want to start by formally thanking Ms. Senior for always choosing the Department of Literatures and English for hosting her book launches. In this case, the collection of poems, Hurricane Watch. This marks a very fruitful and wonderful partnership as the Faculty of Humanities and Education continues to be a stalwart mover and shaker in advancing the collective soul of the region. Hurricane Watch draws so much from the faculty's disciplines. While the ode to literature is obvious, history is present in such poems as Taino Genesis and Cassava Yucca. Culture is replete in poems such as Nancy's Story. Linguistics and modern languages run gamut through the collection. And certainly, this collection, a compendium of Miss Senior's poems, reminds us of the commitment of archival and information studies to record the thoughts, the philosophies, and the worldview of Caribbean people. Through education, this worldview is shared from one generation to the next. Hurricane Watch is a feat in communication and certainly public relations. I'll be getting my hands on this collection that so epitomizes our faculty. And on behalf of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, congratulations, Ms. Senior, on your publication of Hurricane Watch. And we can only conclude that this Hurricane Watch is most certainly preferable to other Hurricane Watch, even as we do all we can to prepare for the season that is upon us. Thank you so much, Dr. Spencer. An honor to be here.
The Department of Literatures and English and the University Bookshop are pleased to welcome Ms. Olive Sr. to the UA Mona campus and on this occasion of the launch of Hurricane Watch. We welcome Ms. Sr., who is no stranger to books, literature, or Mona. In fact, all three are connected in my favorite story about her, at a discussion with teachers and students about gardening in the tropics. Imagine a brand spanking new Faculty of Law, teeming with excited students and teachers, bubbling with ideas and hopes for a discussion as well as answers. The department hosted a discussion with CAPE students about the selected poems for the Literatures in English examination. Students from Middlesex and Surrey attended. Then, a question about meditation in yellow. What does yellow mean? The entire lecture theater leans forward for the answer. Miss Senior smiles and responds, I don't know. I've always liked yellow. What does it mean to you? The shock is solid, and teachers and students look to each other. After some moments of silence, with the AC getting cooler and cooler, She encourages students to respond and asks about their own ideas. The dialogue picks up, and students realize how central they are to meaning making. They share enthusiastically, and the event ends with a flurry of book signing and cheerful exchanges. Olive Sr.'s career began with her not knowing how long a short story should be, or how to make words leap from a page. It is safe to say she found out along the way. With 18 publications of nonfiction, poetry, children's book, a novel, and 3 collections of short stories and other academic works, Senior's body of work is driven by a relentless curiosity, which continues to show us who we are. Her iconic poem, Colonial Girls' School, continues to echo the imperative that we must, as Jamaicans, continue to discover who we are. We must listen to the voices that tell us what we like, yellow, red, and what we can do. We too must discover and use our voices to confront the forces that tell us nothing about who we are. For her groundbreaking work, tireless generosity, and commitment to excellence, she has been awarded both the Silver and Gold Musgrave Awards, the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the OCM Bocas Awards for fiction and nonfiction, and the Honorary Doctor of Letters from the UWI Mona. As Jamaica's Poet Laureate, she continues to shepherd young voices and provide opportunities to integrate the arts, poetry as dance, as visual arts, as sound, music, and drama. After 36 years of writing, Senior is still curious, involved, and deeply committed to the discipline of writing. She once said, "I won't write my biography." And it turns out she does not need to. Her work speaks of her attention to the needs of her neighbors, her recognition of the strategies that can empower and liberate, and the celebration of the quirks and foibles that remind us how human we all are. This launch is another of this collection is another beginning. There is more to come. We are pleased to welcome Ms. Olive Sr. to launch Hurricane Watch.
One more time, we're going to now welcome, formally in the chair, Miss Olive Sr. as we begin this special conversation on her newest poetry collection, Hurricane Watch. Let's have it for Miss Senior, please. Miss Senior, it is great to be here with you to sit and have this conversation on your new poetry book, a collection which pulls together an entire 40 years of your writings. Wow. So I'm going to ask you to start, or have us start by reading one of your poems out of this collection entitled Gastropoda.
Okay, and let me just say how wonderful it is to be here. Thank you to the department and to everyone involved. Thank you all for coming. Gastropoda is the opening poem in the book Shell, and it goes, "You think I've stayed home all my life, moving at snail's pace, sneakily living off another's labor? You think I've naught to leave behind but empty shell? Come, study me. Take my chambered shell apart. Brace yourself for whirlwinds coiled at my heart."
I think Gastropoda, as you just said, is fitting to start today's launch, but it's also so appropriate as the start of the collection itself. It presents for me a fundamental feature of your poetry, the fact that your poetry enables a kind of unraveling, an unveiling. And it really speaks of something that you constantly do through all your writings. That act of uncovering, looking at the way that the process of breaking can reveal more about us, can cause us to see beyond, have a greater understanding of things. So there's so much to unpack here. If you think of this as the start of that focus on shell, that first section of your poetry. And you speak of mollusks, you speak of eggshells, which hatch. You go to the point of ears of corn. I think you say breaking out of swaddling clothes. You speak of human beings through the example of the taínos. Emerging, you say, shelled out. And so I want you to please, if you can, just speak a bit about your use of these different metaphors associated with the idea of shells, which you use in your first section in this collection to portray feelings and experiences on starting points and the journeys which follow these points. Talk to us about that.
Well, let me just say that three of my poetry books, I wrote according to a theme. In other words, I selected the theme first,
right,
or the idea, in this case, the word shell, and then I wrote the poems to the theme. And there's gardening in the tropics, and I can't even remember what the other one is, but anyway. So I have found it a very useful strategy for writing poems, because it forces me to write to begin with, but also as I go along and think of the word and the theme, it opens up, to me as well. So I started off thinking of shell as a hard shell of the mollusk and so on, the actual shells, but then I moved on from there to other shells, like empty shells, which, in which I'm interrogating the residue of colonialism, the emptiness left behind, or I'm looking at shelter, or I'm looking at shell out, which is the birth of things and so on. So this is where all of this is coming from, my interrogating the word shell and allowing it to talk to me in a way. And I've done this with, as I say, three of my books where I've used a theme in order to excavate and discover and so on.
Awesome. There's a line in Gastropoda which says, "Brace yourself for whirlwinds coiled at my heart." It really speaks of the way you anticipate that the reader will become a part of all that the poem is portraying and be involved in the experience of the poem, visually and orally. Let us move into something I know we are all eagerly anticipating as we think about the title of this collection, Hurricane Watch. And as we begin to ponder on why the hurricane, Olive, I want to ask you to read two of the hurricane poems in this collection for us, Hurricanes and Hurricane Watch. And I think this will allow the audience to get a taste of how differently you position and utilize the hurricane metaphor throughout your hurricane-focused poems. So can we start with having you read Hurricanes, and then you can move to Hurricane Watch?
Okay, but let me just say that it just seems natural for me as a Caribbean person to write about natural disasters, because one of the things I'm interested in, of course, is both natural disasters reveal both our strengths and our vulnerabilities and the way we deal with things. So I have a lot of hurricane poems in these various books. And they're written at different times, actually. So this one is just called Hurricanes. Winds that are born out of thin air beyond the Gulf bring other heartaches than hurricanes. Hurricanes expose these empty shelves in our lives. Did you know they were there before the winds signaled us? And that's hurricanes. And then we have Hurricane Watch, which is in the, I think that's in the new collection.
Yes.
And it just goes, Hurricane Watch. Every year, we are forced to reinvent ourselves, growing shabbier. Perhaps uncertainty comes from the shifty breath of hurricanes, their unlocked eyes revolving always counterclockwise, watchful on making us.
And as you just said, you have written different hurricane poems, I think, which speaks to the experience of hurricanes occurring between 1908 and this 21st century. You've answered why the hurricane. What do you think you're attempting to capture, if that's the word, through these hurricane poems?
Well, certainly not the hurricanes. I mean, I'm not. I'm not interested in describing a hurricane or anything like. I don't write those kinds of poems. What I'm interested in is the impact that hurricanes have on our lives over successive generations, and the ways in which successive generations deal with these natural disasters. So my earliest hurricane poem, I think, is 1904, which shows people, just rural Jamaicans, picking themselves up and rebuilding their lives. There's no government or anything to call on. And Hurricane 88, which is the last poem, shows a different society, where we're far more dependent on other people coming to our assistance. So in a way, and one of the poems deals with the migration of the Windrush generation after the 51 hurricane, I think. And that has to do with children left behind, families left behind, that kind of dislocation. So I'm using all the hurricane poems to just look at the impact on society and our lives, yeah.
Just one more question on the hurricanes, and we're looking at the artwork on the cover as well. And really throughout the poems in the collection, including the artwork on the cover, you seem to suggest this kind of dual existence. There is always more than one side of things occurring at one moment in time. Could you say a little more about this?
Yeah, and I must say I really love the book. It's published by Carcanet in England. It feels lovely, and it has this most amazing artwork on the cover by Jasmine Thomas Gervin, the wonderful artist whose work I'm so thrilled to have her work on the cover, and she has also used my work as a sort of inspiration. So there's a kind of synergy, and I think the cover picture really captures what I mean about resilience and survival and so on. Of course, I've now forgotten the question.
That's fine. I really wanted you to speak of the fact that, especially when we look at the cover, that there's kind of two things always happening at the same time, so even with the hurricane. So I wanted you to speak of that, where you have the natural disaster happening and people might see one thing from it, but you allow us to see a kind of paradoxical reality, and that I think runs through all the poems in the collection.
Well, I think that's life, though. That's how I see life, that there's always paradox. There are always at least two sides to everything, and so that is part of my worldview, really, that comes out of the poetry.
All right, so your poetry constantly interacts with concepts of homing and journeying, and I want us to go to the readings of three particular poems which I think reflects this focus: Homescape, Leaving Home, and Iwater. Iwater is my favorite, but we'll come to that after. Right? Homescape, Leaving Home, and Iwater. And you can just read.
Okay.
Yes.
Homescape is from my first book, and I should say this book is a container of all my poetry so far. This is my first book, Talking of Trees, and I was a little reluctant to have this book here because it's very much they're very much first poems, and I'm a bit ashamed of some of them, but anyway, it's here. And Homescape is one of the poems in that book, which goes, I was born with a knowledge of mountains and solitaires, till jet planes and skyscrapers seduce this to mountains alone, and one note of the solitaire, till the politicians' words reduce this to mountains alone. Now the solitaire sings not, and knowledge is brittle as glass. If the solitaire sings again, I'll be born to that life again. Alone I will walk through the glass and become. That's Homescape, and then there's Leaving Home, which is in a later book. Leaving Home. One day, strength from where you don't know, to aim for the opening, to say, I am leaving, to walk to the edge of your feeling, to load up with guilt, not a word from the ones at the threshold, not a word. You keep walking down the dirt track, to the lane, to the street, to the highways of the world. You alone, not yet stunned by the brightness, not by hardness of stone of the pavement. You say, no, I could get used to the lightness. Till the day you are snared by another sensation, on a hilltop at that, you find yourself drowning, a movement of ebbing and flowing. You recognize early or too late that you failed to detach from that mooring. Always cruelty of choice. Here's the knife, yourself, executioner, midwife. And the last one is in the new poems in the collection in a section called Eyed, E-Y-E-D, in which I am looking at vision, I guess, both externally and inner vision and so forth, something that's always interested in me. And it's very short. I should know it by heart. I never trust myself to remember anything by heart. Railway station in the mist. Dawn is breaking. I'm barely as high as the dewdrops on the grass, bound for another place. My heart heavier than my suitcase.
Beautiful. Let me start with Eye Water, which is, yes, it's the last of these three poems you've read, and I will move forward with that. I will ask two other questions based on the previous two, but let's start with Eye Water. It is amazing to me how you capture such a simple human reality, in this instance, a physiological action that we've all been engaged in, whether it's the filling up of our eyes, or it's the bawling, as we know it. But your use of language simultaneously captures both the action and the feeling associated with it, and moves it from being just this simple common experience to now being one that we relish and that we actually start thinking about, in terms of our participation in this. How do you do that? And how important is it for you to be able to manipulate language, to be able to tease out what you need visually, orally, and affectively?
Well, I don't see this in terms of language, though.
Okay.
Because, I also write fiction. And
Yes.
to me, this is a little short story, really.
Okay. Okay.
In other words, my concern is just setting up the picture.
Okay.
And it's a picture that so many people have gone through, and you can interpret it any way. It could be kids going off to boarding school, or you're going off to an orphanage, or Canadian kids taken away from their homes. Mm-hmm. And so, in other words, it is a picture of a child leaving home and very unhappy about it. Mm. So to me, that is the image. So I don't have to tell you what that evokes. It seems to me, and I do the same thing with my short stories. Mm-hmm. I'm setting it up, mm-hmm. and in such a way that I expect you, as a reader, mm-hmm. and as a human being who understands what is happening, you will bring the emotion to it. Right. So you're going to bring the eye water. I don't even have to call it eye water. No. In fact, I gave it the name Eye Water after I'd written it. Okay. Because I wanted a whole set of poems with the word eye in it. So okay. I'm sorry. I don't know, I should shut up because I shouldn't tell you anything.
No, that's fine. I think the fact is that it causes us to focus on something that...
On the emotional,
yes, so we would have felt it, but not necessarily... You pull us into that experience in a whole different way than, we would normally have seen it. Quite powerful. So let's move back a bit to homescape and leaving home. And if you can talk to us about how you experience or how you use your experience of a certain landscape as a kind of root of your beginnings to shape the way you articulate the notion of becoming in your work.
Well, I think all of my early poems in the book are are related to the place I come from, which is rural Jamaica, which is internalized in me. And it's the landscape. It's not so much the people. People are actors in that landscape. And what I carry with me are the mountains and the rocks and the cockpit country and the rivers and the birds and the smell and the sound. You know, that is what lives inside of me. And so when I think of home, that is what I think of. I think of the landscape. But these poems about leaving home too, I think, can resonate with all of us, because psychologically, we all have to leave home, or it's expected that we're all going to leave home. You're going to tear yourself away from that whole maternal, paternal nest and move on in life, or you're going to migrate or whatever. So the whole experience of leaving home, I think, is common to all humanity. Mm-hmm. And the point I'm making in these poems, though, is that you never leave home, in the sense that no matter how far you go and how much you want to get rid of that home, something inside of you that's part of your makeup is always going to pull you back. Yeah. And you can choose to, even if you take the knife to cut that cord, it's not going to happen. You know, so that's my idea of home, that no matter where you go or how far, it's something from your earliest years that lives inside of you, and you will never get rid of it.
That's interesting. And leaving home actually is a really powerful poem, because of the way it allows for a connectivity with a variety of realities and feelings. I'm going to ask a question. I can almost hear what you might say, which is scary. But in leaving home, the theme of resilience is really heavily presented there, and courage, and facing what we need to in spite of the challenges that you know are present, and handling things that may even cause us to break a little. And I think you've spoken about what would have inspired that poem. There's a way, and this is where I can feel your response, so I'm prepared for it. There's a way, there's a way that you manage to articulate so artfully, right? The inside of things, this kind of interiority. And it allows us to connect one thing to multiple experiences. Can you shed some light on what happens there?
I think of myself as, you know, digging around, you know, doing a kind of archaeology. Because, I think if you're born in rural Jamaica, you're shaped by that. You're shaped by just your own response to the things around you. You examine things very, very closely. In a way kids don't do now if you're looking at a screen. You know, the world is textured, and you appreciate that texture. And so I think that's how I view life, but also by the people and the lives they lived, and the fact that people were resourceful and worked hard and so on. All those are part of the things I think about. But I'm also interested in history, and I'm interested. I learned at an early age to question what I read or what I was told.
Yes.
And to find things out for myself. And so I operate at this dual level of what you're told and what you discover for yourself. Right. And so I'm always navigating those two planes of existence. And I think that is what comes out in the work, that I'm looking underneath and inside and above. I never take anything for granted. Right. And that's my worldview, even today.
I can see that. Thank you for bringing up history. History is where we're going next. I know it's very important to you. We see in various poetry books that you have published since 1985. I think what stands out for everyone, and certainly for me as I think of my students, and I think of training teachers, and when I think of that, about the way history has informed your poems, allowing a kind of access, because you enable just what you said, that discovery for others, a history event that we may have just flown over, that you pull it into the poems, and you cause us to think about aspects of history that have remained you know, if not invisible, certainly not visible in particular ways. And you present that to us. Would you be so kind as to read for us Join the Dots, another poem from this lovely collection?
Okay. And let me just say that my engagement with history, I'm not a historian, I'm not a trained historian, but I'm interested in history and digging around. But what interests me is how history is articulated through the individual. You know, I'm interested in talking about history as it impacts individual lives, not collective.
Yes.
And this poem, Join the Dots, came out of that, where I was looking at a book on plantation maps, that was maps commissioned by plantation owners, beautiful works of art, and a significant portion of them did not include the slave village, which is where the people who made the plantation possible lived. So this poem was part of my desire to write back into history, into our lives, the people who were written out. And this is a ghost story in a way, because I chose to tell it through the point of view of a child whose house is now sitting on that slave village. And the children of that slave village of hundreds of years before are talking to her, are talking to us through her. Join the Dots. We played at Join the Dots, Grandma and me, but never could we win the prize. For I saw pictures she could not see. They said I had far-seeing eyes. Our house was built on land where once a village stood, where fragments floating in the air sometimes cried out for personhood. They pounded on the rooftop, tore at the gutter. Hush, it is the wind, Grandma said, but I knew better, though I would never utter a word, for I was sworn to secrets. This is where we once lived too, the children said. We'd like to play with you. When I could not sleep for black dots floating, Grandma said, hush, I'll bring you cocoa tea sweetened with cane sugar and a hint of nutmeg. That will calm you down. I tried to share it with my ghostly friends, who said they lived in land snail shells and sailed all night the village round. Their old ones said, no, you drink up, child. For this our bodies turn to dust, ground into fields of sugarcane, of cocoa walks, of nutmeg groves. Drink in remembrance of us. I drained the cup. The cocoa, sugarcane, the nutmeg touched me so sweetly, I'd sleep long, sleep deeply.
Lovely. And so you said it a while ago, I think, that you provide an opportunity through the history for this inclusivity of things not written in. How do you, is it a buck-ups situation? How do you determine what aspect of any historical situation you will choose as central to the creation of your poem?
Well, you know, it's what strikes me, whether it's a story or an image or an individual event. You know, it is the same way I think all writers choose to write whatever it is you're writing based on what speaks to you. And so I pluck out these moments that I find particularly moving, or things that made me angry or whatever, that provoked some kind of emotion in me. And I say, you know, I want to write about this. In the same way, a lot of my work has to do with the indigenous population, of not just the Taino, but of the Americas. Simply because as a child, you know, we were told, oh, Columbus came and met these primitive little people who died out, sort of thing. And that has stayed in my mind ever since. How could they die out? Where did they go? Which means I've devoted a great part of my life to just finding out about our indigenous people. And I realize it's not just about the people of the Caribbean, but where they came from, which is the Americas in general and so on. So this is how it arises from my own curiosity. Something provokes my curiosity.
Right, I see that. And then your writing is not just discovery for us, it's discovery for you as well.
Absolutely,
I'm seeing that. All right. So your work is heavily framed by and embedded in social and historical contexts, or history and our culture, everywhere in your poetry. So now I'm actually wanting to introduce to this conversation. I'm going to ask him to step forward and place himself in this red chair. Owen Blacka Ellis. Please give it up for Owen, right? Blacka is known as one of the Caribbean's top comedian entertainers.
Take off your mask.
He is also a writer and a lecturer in the area of theater arts and drama. Owen, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you. So I want to ask you to say a little bit about the value of Olive Sr.'s work to somebody like you in the world of Caribbean drama and theater, who kind of automatically understands the significance of embedded culture in the creation of various kinds of art. Let's hear
It's
you.
like a whole essay.
A whole essay.
Wait a minute, Olive. I think, first of all, I think the value of Miss Olive's work, and I have to call her Miss Olive,
Absolutely.
I respect due.
Yeah.
For people like me, is certainly, she underlines the importance of work, of getting there, of putting in the work. You know, we live in a time where people don't understand that to simply write a poem don't make you a poet. You know, you have to put in the work, and and you see the elegant economy of words. You see the obvious evidence of detail of editing and so on. I think that's very, very important. And I thank you for reminding an entire generation or generation that it's not a hurry up thing. You know, you have to, it's a place of attainment that I think many people don't understand. And I'm reminded and I'm encouraged by, certainly, by the understanding that poetry is basically and essentially, firstly, a literary form. And no diss to the stridency and the power of dub and orality and so on. But the poems don't have to be about advocacy and rant and rave and bun down something. They can be the beauty of just indulging words that create character and put you in environments, and that's the value for me of all his work.
Wonderful. Do you have any burning question?
William.
We have space for one question that you would like to pose and have her respond to in this space.
I can't even this one, no, that one. The themes that turn you on and get you excited. You sit with a theme for quite a long time sometimes. Where do you go next thematically? Can you tell us?
When I've run out, when I'm bored with that theme. No, but it's true. You know, I get excited about it. I think all of us do that as writers. And then you run out of steam. And you know, I mean, some people don't know that's when you must stop, but I know.
That won't happen anytime soon, though.
No, when I'm always, the thing is, I always have a lot of things that interest me, so I just move on from one to the next, but I don't belabor it. You know, as I say, when I've come to the end of something, I know, but I always have something else that I want to go to. And you know, this is something that if you want to write, you need to keep a basket of ideas somewhere there. You can't just wait for inspiration. You need to create, you need to build up an interest in ideas and things and so on, so that you never run dry.
Well, your every work is a lesson. Your every work is a whole course. So I'm learning at your feet.
Thank you. Well, I love your feet. I hope you're catching it.
Match the socks.
Matching socks. Mr. Cameraman, you gotta catch it out there.
Oh, and thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Blacka. I'm a great admirer of your work and what you're doing too. So thank you for coming and saying a few words.
Thank you so much.
All right, so we're gonna just go back into our conversation now. So grateful that Blacka could have joined us. You know what, Olive, you show us that poetry is everywhere. And I think that's fantastic. It's in conversations, it's in the natural forms of life we encounter and pass by daily. Like, who stops and looks at a snail and discovers the circles on the snail's shell without us, things that we would not give a second glance to. In the lines of historical narratives, as you just pulled out a while ago as well, just everywhere. One example is tropic love, which comes from your Gardening in the Tropics publication, which is also now a part of this new book. We would just love it if you would read that for us.
Yeah, and let me say, when Gardening in the Tropics was on the Cape syllabus, and I was hoping the other story about yellow wasn't going to be narrated, Tropic Love, I think, was a student's most popular, one of the most popular students, Tropic Love. Gardening in the Tropics, you hear poetry in some unexpected places. Sitting on my veranda last night, I overheard two people passing by. The woman said, "You don't bring me flowers anymore, or anything for the children. My heart has turned to stone, but I cannot put that in the pot. Love me and my family, or leave me to sit by the roadside to sell, by the riverside taking in washing, by my lady's fire cooking for my living. I'm a woman with heavy responsibilities. With my lot, I'm prepared to be contented. With your sweet words, lover, tempt me not if you've come empty-handed."
Lovely. Say a little bit on just the process leading up to the construction of that poem. Were you literally walking by? How did that happen?
No, I just, again, I'm creating a scene because I suppose because I write fiction, I'm very visual. I visualize everything that I write. And so, I didn't want to just have the two people talking out there. I wanted a listener. I wanted to position them in a particular space. Yeah. So it's natural. We sit on our verandas, so we overhear people passing by. And this is what somebody overheard. Yeah.
All right. Tell us a little more. I mean, we can't see it visually, but I think a number of us know that poem. Tell us about your use of form in your poems. Sometimes it's concrete poems or found poems, your intentional spaces and the presentation of lines. How important is it to you that you offer a range of poetic forms, and what do you hope to achieve by that?
Well, for me as a poet, form is as important as the words. I mean, every single poem I write is a marriage of words and form, and I think about how I want to set it out, whether it's a concrete poem, which takes a shape, or whatever. So even if it's simply breaking up a long poem into 2-line stanzas or 3-line stanzas, to enable the reader to enter the poem more easily than just having a big block of words. So form for me is an essential part of writing poetry, which as you know, I think of poetry as pictures, as action, as form, as words, as music, as song. It's all of those things. But I probably spend more time on form than most poets because I have to get the form right. It doesn't matter. I get the words right, but then I play around with the form, and the two things have to fit together. And one reinforces the other, because when you open a book of poems, the first thing you see is a form. You see the shape, you see the way it sits on the page, and your desire to read it and to enter that poem depends on how the shape speaks to you. You might look at a long, dense poem and say, "Me not read that." As I confess I do. And so part of the form and the shape to me is to create a way of enticing the reader in and making it seem accessible. And so line breaks, word breaks, and then I use very long lines, which I would then put into maybe 2-line stanzas, or I use very short lines, which can go on. So it's all very carefully thought out, and it's very much a part of my practice. And as I wrote in my blog for Carcanet, which you can read, the blog is called Poetry as Islands, or something like that. I don't remember the exact title. But I'm talking about seeing each poem on the page as an island, yes. You know, standing there by itself. And the same way a lot is hidden when we first approach an island. We see a part of it, but there's a lot underground, a lot to be excavated. And that's how I hope my poems will be approached as well.
Awesome. I want to just use that as a segue into looking at the teaching of the poetry. Alistair Ellis should have been here today, but was unable to be here. He's a graduate student of the department as well as a teacher, and a budding poet, I would say as well. Just looking at that idea of access, in order for people to see poetry and what is possible through poetry, those of us who are the holders of these poetic treasures, right, we have to position them in particular ways as well to allow these poems to be heard and to be seen. I want to touch on the situation of teaching your poems, especially coming out of Tropic Love. And I want to pull into this conversation, pull that in because we have students who will still interface, even though it's off the syllabus, based on what the language syllabus is. They can read any of your poems at any given time for both language and literature through the unseen paper. Sometimes it's not simply encouraging students to read the poems, Olive. It's also heavily about what they see us doing with those poems and what we're enabling for reading, interpreting, and responding through that. I've heard you talk to teachers in training, and I think Ms. Brown brought it up, that particular instance, about the importance of hearing how students view the poem. What advice do you think you would give to those who teach your work as it concerns guiding students' engagement with your poetry?
Well, yeah, I think what is helpful to even say writing students who are coming to poetry is first talking about how to read a poem. It's something we take for granted, and it's probably the reason why so many of us in school grew up to hate poetry. Absolutely. Because we're not given the tools. We're just given a thing out there, and we're not told that, you know, the title is meaningful, the theme is meaningful, the time period in which it is set, the speaker, all these things. So I would certainly suggest that if you're going to teach poetry, you need to start off there. And you know, you teach poetry, you know, that enabling people to understand that it's not everyone is going to read something and get it. You know, so it helps to understand where the poet is coming from. Where is this poem set? You know, what's the time period, what's it about, and so on. So I think that can be very helpful. I mean, a lot of us can discover poetry on our own, but I think it's those of us who want to go through the painful process of being poets ourselves who are willing to put in the work, you know, required to really understand poetry and to get it. But the average reader or the average student, I think, needs a lot of help. And that's a way of saying, okay, this is how you read a poem.
Lovely. Thank you for that. All right, so many of your poems have an environmental focus, all right? And it is clear that you pull together human lives and the whole ecosystem, and you seem to portray how everything is connected and how everything works together, or how it should, right? I want us to listen to Brief Lives, a poem which I think aptly reflects that environmental focus. So if you would just read Brief Lives for us first, and then we can continue the discussion with another discussant that we will call to the red chair in a moment. Brief Lives.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure Brief Lives is about the environment, but the creative environment, social environment that we have created. Gardening in the tropics, you never know what will turn up. Quite often, bones. In some places, they say, when volcanoes erupt, they spew out dense and monumental stones, the skulls of desaparecidos, the disappeared ones. Mine is only a kitchen garden, so I unearth just occasional skeletons. The latest was a young man from the country who lost his way and crossed the invisible boundary into rival political territory. I buried him again so he can carry on growing. Our cemeteries are thriving too. The newest addition was a drug baron wiped out in territorial competition who had a stunning funeral, complete with 21-gun salute and attended by everyone, especially the young girls, famed for the vivacity of their dress, their short skirts, and even briefer lives.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, somebody who I believe understands the social engagement embedded in that kind of environmental focus, Miss Anne-Margaret Lim, journalist and poet. A special welcome to you, Anne.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I have probably a couple questions for you, but I want you to tie it in and then have that conversation with Olive. What is the significance of Olive Senior's work for you, particularly as it engages with environmental and nature themes? Because you as a poet tend to concentrate heavily on those themes as well. You can start there and I'll give you the second part after.
Okay. Well, the thing is, Miss Senior actually said it earlier, but when I read her books, her poetry books, I was drawn to her because I realized that the things that she wrote about were home. And home is landscape. Home is the people. So the interconnection between the home, the landscape, the people, all of that is one. And the things that she wrote about, there's this affinity. And I, in my mind, I had some of my favorite poets before having read her. And she became my top 3 in the world, my top 3 favorite poets, not just her, right? And in 2012, I think it was 2012, I went to Calabash, and I hadn't seen her before in person, and she was reading on stage. And I have to tell you that it was the very first time I saw Miss Senior read on stage, and the stage was an altar.
Wow.
Yeah, she was praying. So I actually cried because I saw her and the way she was reading her poems, everything that she said in terms of the line breaks and the rhythm, it came out, and she was actually at an altar. And I just couldn't help it, but I cried. And I think after that I had seen Garfield Ellis, and I was gushing to Garfield Ellis about her, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I met her and all that, And he was like, well, why don't you just tell her yourself, And I was passing by with my daughter, and she was having lunch with Garfield Ellis and some others. I can't remember who else, but I was just focusing on Olive Senior. And I said, hi. And I don't remember what the conversation exactly was, but I know you told me that, well, if you love poetry so much, because I was gushing, you should write. And I said, well, I do. And then she said, well, put them together as a book. I'm like, well, I have a book, and I gave it to her. I think I was published the year before, or something like that. So I was very happy to have met her, and she means a lot to me.
And I think that's yes, and I think that's an important story, because I think so many other people, that's one of the reasons she's so precious in the space that she occupies, because it's always about encouraging other people to do it too. you can. I want to talk about looking at the journalist side of things, right? And I'm doing this because she speaks so heavily on access, and her poetry allows access different spaces across periods of time and across generations, as Blacka had said earlier. When we consider how deeply socially engaging, we just heard Brief Lives, how deeply socially engaging she is as a writer, and I'm using this term very narrowly perhaps, but who reports on so much that enables us to really get to know and appreciate what she is saying, what she's talking about, that item of reporting, in ways that we previously have not. Can you talk about that aspect of it and how you see that point of connection there with journalism and her poetry? Okay.
Because the love for the country is so real, and the connection, the deep-rootedness is there. Miss Senior writes poems that Yes, it does have that journalistic vibe. In the recent collection, the new collection, Dead Straight Shot, not Straight Shot.
Yes,
Dead Straight.
Well, two of them.
Oh, yes.
There's
Yeah,
Dead
Sure
Straight
Shot, yeah.
and
There's, I know.
Sure Shot, I think.
Sure Shot. All
There you go,
right.
yes.
So the Sure Shot experience
Yes.
could have been me watching the news.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
But it was a Gleaner picture. I'm not sure if it was a Gleaner, but it was a newspaper picture. It was Observer picture. It was a newspaper picture. And it's what's happening in Jamaica. A young girl. And being so connected, being so in love with your own country. The pain. You internalized it. And I should tell you that it affected me so much that I just wrote a poem after reading yours, and it's called After Olive Senior's Dead Shot. Straight Shot. Dead Shot, right? Because the other point that I wanted to make is that Straight Shot, for example, I wanted to ask you a question about Straight Shot. I wanted to know if when you wrote Straight Shot, if you knew right away. For me, it's connected to that the tourist resort, that poem. Rejected text for a tourist resort. After reading Dead Straight, I saw the connection. But I have the two books, I have the entire collection looking at. So when you wrote that poem, were you thinking of the other poem in the beginning? Or did you see the connection after putting the book together? Or did you see the connection?
Well, I don't see connections when I'm writing. So it's been very helpful to see all my poems together in a book. I've never considered them all together before. And suddenly I am seeing connections. Obviously, Rejected Text for a Tourist Brochure and Dead Straight, I mean, they're obviously connected, once you don't even have to think about it. But I was just thinking about the impact on the environment of progress, tourism and so on, at different stages of my life, because the poems are written a long time, many years apart. Yeah.
So it also goes back to what Blacker had said earlier. He had asked the question about so many different themes, are you going to run out? They come back. They come back because there's always that interaction.
And things, what is it, the more things change, the more they stay the same, and which is sad in a way, because the poem I read earlier, Brief Lives, I wrote that a long time ago, but it could be a poem about yesterday, what's happening,
and even that poem that comes after Straight Shot, I don't know if it's
Killer Bees.
Killer Bees, right?
Yeah.
All right, so Killer Bees made me think of something that happened in 2020 that was in the news. It may not be exactly that, but that's the journalist part of it and the anthropological part. I wanted to know if that was it. I don't think it is exactly, but it's similar. In COVID year, the first year, a girl was mob attacked by other girls who just didn't like how she looked at them. Right? But so that made me think of something similar to that.
Yeah.
But was that a news? Was that a news story?
No. And Killer Bees, I wrote it actually in Canada, and it is based on a true story of a girl who was bullied and she pushed to her death in a way. And I'm likening this attack on her as an attack by Killer Bees, but it happens everywhere now. The idea of kids being bullied and so on. But it's a pretty old poem, this Killer Bees one. Yeah. Okay. But it's the theme. The topic it's topical, I suppose. Yeah.
So and so going back to the first point of you writing about home, and home is where you are. So it's also Canada. It's what affects you.
Yeah.
And that's what I picked up.
Yeah. But it's
read your work.
like my pandemic poems. They are universal, they're global, because I see myself as a global citizen. So a lot of what I write about it might be located here in this space, but I'm conscious of the fact that other people elsewhere in the world and over time have had these same experiences, because we're all human. So I'm basically writing out of the human condition,
Yes.
you know.
That's the other thing that I noticed.
Yeah.
The home is because she's in the world. And I wanted to ask one last question.
Sure. Black is going to kill me afterwards because
I just wanted to know. I'm not sure I saw the pandemic poems in this collection.
No, they're not here.
Okay.
No.
And your George Floyd, the B is for breathe.
Yeah.
That's a poem that makes me cry. So when she did it last year and I saw her doing it, it made me cry again. So
Yeah.
it goes back to you are
Yeah.
who you write from where you are, what you experience. And that's
Yeah.
a writer's, a poet's
Yeah.
job.
A job, yeah.
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
and Margaret,
Margaret.
for coming on and being a part of this conversation. So we have one final poem. I was very tempted to ask you to read Sure Shot, but I'm going to hold back a bit for the sake of our audience. Right? The last poem I'm going to ask you to read is Bird Shooting Season. Still tied to an environmental focus, but leaving us with the opportunity once again to think of other ways through which we might see what is happening around us. Could you go ahead and read that poem?
Yeah, and this is a poem from my childhood in my first collection about events that actually happened. Bird shooting season. Bird shooting season, the men make marriages with their guns. My father's house turns macho as from far the hunters gather. All night long, contentless women stir their brews. Hot coffee, chocolata, cerisi, rap poem, and Tylee for tomorrow's sport. Tonight, the men drink white rum neat. In darkness, shouldering their packs, their guns, they leave. We stand quietly on the doorstep, shivering. Little boys longing to grow up bird hunters too. Little girls whispering, fly birds, fly.
As we close, Olive, and you're not expecting this at all, right? But work with me here. The notion of seeing and the idea of having visions, you've spoken to that. This poem is an example for me of this invoking often of a deep sense of seeing more and seeing beyond the actual. As we close off, though I think we could go on for a lot longer, based on the depth of poetry you produce, as Anne Margaret just said, leave us with an understanding, if you can, of what you have discovered of your own journey as a poet. Don't kill me on this one. But just listening to you, and Anne Margaret brought it up again with these connections that you don't see until a time after. Talk to us about what you've discovered of your own journey. And if we can just tweak that to adding, extended that, what would you desire others to experience generally of your poetry? Let's start with your discovery first.
No, let's start with the second one because I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
What do you desire? So when we read generally speaking, clearly you can't speak of the specific instances of what we will experience as the reader. But when you write your poetry, what do you desire to come of that for us as readers?
I don't know that I mean, I'm writing the poem and I'm handing it out.
Right.
And I know people bring different expectations reading. So I personally don't expect anything. I know some people will get it and some won't, and some people might just enjoy 2 lines. And you know, so I don't think it's up to me as a poet to have expectations of the reader. I am giving the reader something, and the reader has to bring something to bear, has to join me somewhere in that poem. So that's how I look at any of my writing, you know. In terms of my own journey, and it was interesting, as I said, to see all my poems collected here. And one of the things that struck me is how from my earliest poems, the things that engaged me were there, embodied in that book. Maybe not expressed as well as later poems and so on. But I think my vision has, from the very start, has been consistent. And, you know, it's my engagement with the world around me, both the physical world, but also the social, with the people within that world and how they interact, and so on. And that, I haven't wavered from that interest in, you know, in my own, how I approach the world, how, you know, how I live my life, what I write about, and so on. So, and that sort of surprised me, to be honest, because, you know, it's a long journey, and I've done a lot of things, been to a lot of places. But I do feel that within the book there is a sort of hardcore of what I'm about, you know, for anybody who chooses to, who is interested in finding out. You're probably the only one, but never mind.
I knew there was going to be a punchline somewhere. Okay, well, I
have to thank you so much, though,
it's been a pleasure,
Aisha, for going to all this trouble. And I want to, you know, thank everyone involved, the bookstore, the department, for, you know, going to all the trouble of creating this event, which I know is taking a lot of time and energy and effort and so on. I'm really, really, truly grateful. And thank you all for coming, and I hope the party is about to begin.
All right, so we are closing. Thank you so much to the audience in the physical space. Thank you to viewers online. And we are now going to say au revoir for now. Walk good.